The family video began with a photograph I had taken 31 years ago, and somehow I was not in it. That was the moment I realized I had disappeared from my own family's story. My name is Loretta Hayes. I am 67 years old, and until that evening, I believed becoming invisible happened slowly. I was wrong. Sometimes it happens all at once, in a room full of people who are supposed to know exactly who you are. The celebration was for my granddaughter Emily's 18th birthday. Brandon and Melissa had rented a private room at a country club just outside town. There were balloons, flowers, and a large projection screen set up beside the dance floor. Friends and relatives filled the room. Everyone seemed happy. I was happy too. At least, I thought I was. Emily looked beautiful in a pale blue dress. She moved from table to table greeting guests while music played softly in the background. Watching her smile reminded me of the little girl who used to sit on my kitchen counter and help me bake chocolate chip cookies every Saturday morning. Those memories felt close enough to touch. After dinner, Melissa stood and tapped a spoon against her glass. She announced a special surprise. A video celebrating Emily's life. The lights dimmed. Conversations stopped. The screen flickered to life. The first photographs appeared. Emily as a baby. Emily learning to walk. Emily's first day of school. Emily at soccer practice. Emily opening Christmas presents. The room filled with laughter and warm memories. People pointed at the screen and shared stories. I smiled and watched along with everyone else. Then something strange happened. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. Hundreds of photographs appeared one after another. Birthday parties. Family vacations. School events. Holiday gatherings. Yet I noticed something that nobody else seemed to see. I was not in any of them. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Then I began paying closer attention. The family beach trip where I spent a week watching Emily while Brandon and Melissa went sightseeing. I was missing. The Christmas morning when everyone gathered in my living room. Missing. The 4th of July picnic I organized for 23 relatives. Missing. Every memory remained. I was simply removed from it. My hands rested quietly in my lap. Across the room, relatives laughed at stories connected to photographs I remembered taking myself. Melissa narrated parts of the video from her table. She spoke confidently, explaining family traditions and favorite memories. Several of those traditions had started in my home decades earlier. Yet my name never came up. Not once. I glanced toward Brandon. He seemed completely absorbed by the presentation. Either he had not noticed, or he chose not to. I could not decide which possibility hurt more. When the video finally ended, the room erupted into applause. Emily smiled politely and thanked everyone. Melissa looked proud. Guests returned to their conversations. Nobody seemed aware that something important had just happened. Nobody except me. I sat there staring at the dark screen. The photographs had shown a family I recognized. The stories belonged to my life. The traditions came from my home. The memories carried my fingerprints everywhere. Yet somehow I was absent from all of them. For the first time since my husband Thomas passed away, I felt something colder than grief. I felt erased. And as I watched everyone celebrate around me, a quiet question settled into my mind. If I had vanished from the story on that screen, how long had I been disappearing everywhere else? The drive home that night felt longer than usual. Streetlights passed across my windshield one after another while Emily's birthday celebration replayed in my mind. I could still hear the applause, still see the smiling faces, still see that screen filled with memories that somehow no longer included me. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light Thomas installed years ago cast a soft glow across the front steps. For a moment, I stayed in the car and stared at the house. The same house where Brandon learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. The same house where Emily spent countless weekends building blanket forts in the living room. The same house where every holiday tradition shown in that video had begun. Yet somehow, the story now belonged to everyone except me. Inside, the silence felt heavier than usual. Since Thomas passed away 18 months earlier, I had grown accustomed to quiet evenings. But this felt different. I hung my coat by the door and walked slowly through the house. Family photographs lined the hallway walls. Birthdays, graduations, vacations, smiling faces from different chapters of our lives. I stopped in front of one picture taken nearly 20 years earlier. Brandon stood between Thomas and me at a county fair, holding an oversized stuffed bear he had won at a game booth. I remembered the day perfectly. The summer heat, the smell of popcorn, the The way Thomas laughed when Brandon insisted on carrying that bear through the entire fairgrounds. Looking at the photograph, I wondered how many stories disappeared when the people who lived them stopped telling them. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Old habits are difficult to break. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching dawn slowly brighten the backyard. The maple tree Thomas planted during our first year in the house stood tall outside the window. Its branches swayed gently in the early morning breeze. For years, I had believed family connections were permanent. They changed, certainly. Children grew up. Grandchildren became independent. Life moved forward. But the foundation remained. At least that was what I thought. As the coffee cooled in my mug, memories from the past 6 months began surfacing. Small things. Easy things to dismiss. Melissa organizing family gatherings without telling me until the last minute. Holiday cards arriving with everyone else's names printed neatly inside, while mine appeared handwritten at the bottom as an afterthought. Group photographs posted online where I somehow never seemed to appear. At the time, each incident felt insignificant. Now they formed a pattern. Later that afternoon, I opened social media and scrolled through photographs from Emily's birthday party. There they were. Dozens of pictures uploaded only hours earlier. Emily smiling beside friends. Brandon standing proudly with his daughter. Melissa greeting guests. Family members gathered around tables. I appeared in exactly one photograph. Not because I was part of the celebration. Because I happened to be visible in the background near a doorway. I stared at the image longer than I should have. Then I closed the application and set my phone down. Across the room, sunlight spilled through the living room windows and illuminated the family photo albums stacked neatly on a bookshelf. For years, I had assumed memories protected themselves. That important people remained part of the story simply because they had always been there. Sitting alone in that quiet house, I began to understand something uncomfortable. People do not disappear all at once. First, they disappear from conversations. Then from decisions. Then from photographs. By the time anyone notices, they are already fading from the story entirely. And for the first time, I found myself wondering exactly when my own disappearance had begun. Over the next few weeks, I stopped looking for dramatic proof that something was wrong. I did not need it anymore. The truth was hiding in ordinary moments. On a Tuesday afternoon, I received an email about a family barbecue scheduled for the following weekend. The message had been forwarded to me by accident. Everyone else had received it 3 days earlier. Melissa apologized and blamed a technical mistake. I accepted the explanation politely. 2 days later, Emily mentioned a family planning meeting for an upcoming vacation. It was the first time I had heard about it. Apparently, conversations had already been happening for weeks. Again, nobody seemed to think that was unusual. At first, I wondered if I was becoming overly sensitive. Grief changes people. Losing Thomas had left an empty space in every part of my life. Maybe I was simply noticing things that had always been there. But the more I paid attention, the harder it became to dismiss what I saw. One Saturday morning, I visited a local bookstore downtown. While browsing, I ran into an old family friend named Carol. We spent nearly an hour talking between shelves filled with biographies and travel books. During our conversation, she casually mentioned seeing photographs from a recent family outing. I smiled and asked which outing she meant. Carol looked surprised. Apparently, Brandon, Melissa, Emily, and several relatives had spent the day at a lakeside park 2 weekends earlier. There had been picnics, games, and family photographs. I knew nothing about it. Carol immediately realized her mistake and changed the subject, but the damage was done. Driving home, I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. It was not the event itself that bothered me. Families gather all the time. What troubled me was how natural it seemed for everyone to assume I was no longer part of those moments. That evening, I opened an old storage cabinet in the living room. Inside were scrapbooks I had assembled over 4 decades. Birthday cards, school photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, family memories carefully preserved year after year. I sat on the floor surrounded by albums and slowly turned the pages. There was Brandon at age 10 wearing a baseball uniform. Emily holding a pumpkin she picked from a farm field. Thomas standing beside a Christmas tree we spent an entire afternoon decorating together. Every page reminded me of something important. Families do not appear out of nowhere. Traditions do not create themselves. Stories do not tell themselves. Someone builds them. Someone remembers them. Someone keeps them alive. For most of my life, that person had been me. As the afternoon sunlight moved across the room, another realization settled over me. Melissa was not simply forgetting to include me. She had become the new storyteller, the new organizer, the new keeper of family history. And little by little, her version of that history seemed to leave less and less room for me. What hurt most was Brandon's silence. If anyone should have noticed, it was him. Yet every missing invitation, every forgotten acknowledgement, every rewritten memory passed without objection. By the time evening arrived, I closed the final scrapbook and returned it to the cabinet. Then I sat quietly in the fading light. For the first time, I stopped asking whether my disappearance was real. The evidence was everywhere. The better question was why nobody else seemed willing to see it. The following Sunday, I found myself thinking less about what Melissa was doing and more about what I had spent my life building. It is easy to focus on the people who overlook you. It is harder to remember your own worth when they do. That afternoon, rain tapped softly against the windows while I sat at the dining room table sorting through old boxes from the attic. I had not opened most of them since Thomas passed away. Inside were faded photographs, school awards, handwritten notes, and dozens of small reminders of a life that once felt so full. I found Brandon's first report card carefully folded inside a manila envelope. I found a photograph of the Little League team Thomas coached for 3 summers. I found a Mother's Day card Brandon made in 3rd grade. The front showed a crooked drawing of our family standing in front of the house. On the inside, written in uneven pencil, were the words, "Mom, thank you for making everything better." I sat there holding that card for a long time. Memories arrived one after another. Thomas working overtime when money was tight. Me taking evening bookkeeping jobs while Brandon was asleep upstairs. Weekends spent driving across the county for baseball tournaments. Years of packed lunches, parent conferences, scraped knees, broken hearts, and ordinary sacrifices that never felt extraordinary at the time. We simply did what parents do. We showed up. We stayed. We built a life together. After Thomas died, I continued doing the same thing. I helped Emily with school projects. I attended every recital and soccer game I could. I hosted Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, Easter lunches, and summer cookouts. When Brandon and Melissa needed help, I was there. Not because anyone asked, because family mattered to me. As the afternoon passed, I noticed something else hidden among the photographs. In nearly every picture, I was holding the camera. Birthdays, vacations, holiday gatherings. I had spent decades preserving memories while rarely appearing in them myself. The realization made me smile sadly. Perhaps that was how disappearing begins. Not with one dramatic moment, but with years of standing just outside the frame. Later that evening, I came across an old journal Thomas kept during his retirement. Most entries were simple observations about weather, gardening, and family visits. Then I found one sentence that stopped me. "Loretta is the center of this family. I hope they never forget that." I read it twice. Then a third time. Tears filled my eyes. Not because the words were dramatic, but because they were true. Thomas had seen me clearly. He had understood the countless invisible things that held our family together. Sitting alone in the quiet house, I realized something important. Melissa might be rewriting parts of the family story. Brandon might be allowing it to happen. But neither of them could erase the life I had actually lived. They could overlook my contributions. They could forget where tradition started. They could even stop mentioning my name. None of that changed the truth. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something steadier. I was beginning to remember that my value had never depended on whether someone else chose to acknowledge it. 3 days later, the question that changed everything arrived from the person I least expected. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was trimming rose bushes in the backyard when my phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen. I smiled immediately. No matter how complicated things felt with the rest of the family, conversations with my granddaughter had always been easy. We talked about school first, then college applications, then a new part-time job she had recently started. Everything seemed normal. Then her voice grew quieter. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" she said. There was hesitation in her tone, the kind that appears when someone is unsure whether they should continue. I told her she could ask me anything. A brief silence followed. Then she said, "Why are you never in the family stories anymore?" For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The question was so direct, so simple, yet it touched the exact place I had been trying not to examine too closely. I sat down on a patio chair and stared across the yard. Emily continued before I could answer. She told me she had watched the birthday video several more times after the party. She noticed something felt strange. Every important family memory seemed to involve people she knew. Her parents, her cousins, her grandfather, friends, relatives. Yet somehow I appeared almost nowhere. I thought maybe it was a mistake, she admitted. But then I started looking at other things too. My grip tightened around the phone. Emily explained that she had recently gone through old social media posts, family albums, and photo collections. The farther back she looked, the more confused she became. She found dozens of photographs taken inside my house. Holiday dinners around my dining room table. Birthday celebrations in my backyard. Christmas mornings in my living room. Yet captions rarely mentioned me. Sometimes I was cropped out completely. Other times, my role seemed to vanish from the explanation beneath the picture. Listening to her, I felt both sadness and relief. Sadness because someone else had finally noticed. Relief because I was no longer imagining it. Emily asked another question. Did you stop coming to family events for a while? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the truth was the opposite. For years, I had attended nearly everything. I organized many of those events myself. I explained some of that gently, not to defend myself, simply to answer honestly. Emily listened carefully. Then she said something I will never forget. That is weird, Grandma. It is like someone took you out of the story after it was already written. After we ended the call, I remained sitting outside long after the conversation was over. A cool breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower hummed. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary afternoon. Yet something important had changed. For months, maybe longer, I had been asking myself whether I mattered less than I once did. Emily's question revealed something different. The problem was not that I mattered less. The problem was that someone had slowly rewritten the story without me. And now, for the first time, another person could see it too. Emily's question stayed with me for days. Not because it was complicated, but because it was honest. Children and teenagers have a way of noticing things adults learn to ignore. The more I thought about her words, the more I realized how much energy I had spent trying to earn a place in a story that already belonged to me. One morning, I stood in my kitchen staring at a calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Nearly every square was filled with reminders connected to other people. Emily's school events, family birthdays, appointments I scheduled for relatives, volunteer work I agreed to because someone asked. Looking at that calendar, I suddenly wondered when I had last planned something simply because I wanted to do it. The answer embarrassed me. I could not remember. For years, my schedule had revolved around everyone else's needs. After Thomas passed away, that habit only grew stronger. Staying busy helped me avoid loneliness. Helping others made me feel useful. Yet somewhere along the way, usefulness became my identity. If nobody needed anything from me, I often felt uncertain about where I belonged. That afternoon, I made a small decision. Nothing dramatic. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. I had always wanted to learn. Years earlier, Thomas encouraged me to try. Back then there was never enough time. Raising Brandon, managing work, caring for family, hosting gatherings. Something else always came first. The class met every Thursday evening. The following week, I walked into a bright room filled with easels, brushes, and complete strangers. For the first few minutes, I felt awkward. Then something unexpected happened. Nobody knew me as Brandon's mother. Nobody knew me as Emily's grandmother. Nobody knew me as the woman who hosted holiday dinners. I was simply Loretta. By the end of the evening, I found myself smiling more than I had in months. The following Thursday, I returned. Then again the week after that. Gradually, I began meeting people outside my usual circle. A retired teacher named Diane. A former firefighter named Richard. A woman named Susan who had traveled across 30 states after turning 60. Their conversations rarely involved family drama or old expectations. Instead, they talked about books, hobbies, travel, and future plans. Future plans. The phrase felt strange at first. For a long time, I had assumed the most interesting chapters of my life were already behind me. Yet listening to them, I started imagining possibilities again. Around the same time, something else changed. I stopped being the first person to call. I stopped checking whether I had been invited. I stopped searching social media for proof that I still belonged. If Brandon wanted to call, he could call. If Melissa wanted to include me, she could include me. For the first time, I allowed silence to remain silence. The result surprised me. Nobody seemed angry. Nobody confronted me. In fact, most people appeared not to notice immediately. That realization hurt a little. Then it set me free. One Saturday morning, I drove to a nearby lake with a sketchbook and a folding chair. The water reflected the autumn sky like polished glass. As I sat there drawing the shoreline, I felt something I had not experienced in a very long time. Peace. Not because my family had changed. Not because old problems disappeared. Because for the first time, I was beginning to build a life that did not depend on being remembered by someone else. As autumn slowly gave way to winter, I noticed something surprising. The less I focused on being included, the more clearly I could see my own life taking shape again. Thursday evenings became my favorite part of the week. The painting class continued, and my confidence grew with every session. My landscapes were far from perfect, but perfection was never the point. For 2 hours each week, I was creating something simply because it brought me joy. That feeling had been missing for longer than I realized. One afternoon, Diane invited several classmates to lunch after our session. We spent nearly 3 hours talking and laughing in a small cafe downtown. At one point, someone asked about my hobbies. The question caught me off guard. For years, if someone asked who I was, I would have answered with my family roles. Mother, wife, grandmother. Now I found myself talking about painting, gardening, books, and places I still hope to visit. Driving home afterward, I realized I had spent an entire afternoon without thinking about whether anyone had called me, invited me, or remembered me. Meanwhile, changes were happening elsewhere. Brandon started reaching out more often. At first, the calls seemed random. A quick check-in, a question about a recipe, a brief conversation about work. Nothing unusual, yet I sensed something beneath the surface. He sounded uncertain, almost as if he was trying to reconnect without knowing exactly how. One Sunday evening, he called while I was organizing sketches from a recent trip to the lake. "Mom, we have not seen you much lately," he said. The statement made me smile. For months, I had been present whenever invited. The difference now was that I had stopped chasing invitations. I answered gently, explaining that I had been busy, which was true. Brandon seemed surprised. He asked about my schedule, and for the first time in years, I described activities that had nothing to do with family obligations. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "I did not know you were doing all that." "Neither did I almost replied. A few days later, Emily visited after school. We sat at the kitchen table drinking hot chocolate while snow drifted outside the window. She flipped through some of my paintings and asked questions about the class. Then she looked around the room. "You seem happier lately," she said. Her observation lingered with me long after she left. Happier. Not because old wounds had disappeared. Not because relationships were suddenly fixed. Happier because I was finally investing energy into my own life instead of waiting for permission to matter. Around the same time, I began noticing small signs that my absence was no longer going unnoticed. Family group messages arrived asking whether I planned to attend upcoming events. Relatives reached out directly rather than through Melissa. Even holiday preparations seemed different. Nobody said it openly, but something had shifted. The role I once filled automatically now sat empty when I was not there. For years, I believed being valued meant being needed. Standing in my kitchen one snowy evening, I understood the difference. Being needed often disappears when circumstances change. Being valued is something entirely different. And for the first time in a very long while, I was beginning to value myself whether anyone else remembered to or not. A week before Christmas, Emily showed up at my house carrying a dusty cardboard box she had discovered while helping organize storage shelves in the garage. She set it carefully on my dining room table and smiled. "I think these belong to you," she said. Inside were dozens of old photo albums, envelopes filled with printed pictures, and several scrapbooks I had not seen in years. Most had been packed away after Thomas passed. Emily and I spent the afternoon turning pages together. Every album seemed to reveal another piece of family history. There were photographs from camping trips, birthday parties, school graduations, church picnics, and holiday gatherings stretching back decades. What surprised Emily most was not how many photographs existed. It was how often I appeared in them. There I was helping Brandon build a science fair project at the kitchen table. There I was teaching Emily how to decorate Christmas cookies. There I was standing beside Thomas at countless family celebrations. The more pages we turned, the quieter Emily became. Finally, she looked up and asked a question. Why have I never seen most of these before? I did not have an answer. Some albums had simply remained in storage for years. Others had never been digitized or shared online. Yet as we continued looking through them, a different truth emerged. The family history Emily had grown up seeing represented only part of the story. Entire chapters were missing. Later that afternoon, Emily found an envelope tucked inside one of Thomas's old journals. Inside were photographs taken during a 4th of July gathering nearly 10 years earlier. In almost every image, family members crowded around tables in my backyard. One photograph showed me carrying trays of food while relatives laughed nearby. Another showed me helping children organize games. A third captured Thomas smiling as he watched everyone enjoy the celebration. Emily stared at the pictures for a long moment. These look like the same traditions we still do every year, she said. I nodded. Many of them had started right there in that backyard. For the next several hours, we continued sorting through photographs and stories. Occasionally, Emily asked questions. Where did this tradition begin? Who planned this trip? Who organized this holiday dinner? The answers were often the same. Not because I wanted credit, because it was simply the truth. As evening approached, Emily began taking photographs of some of the older pictures with her phone. She wanted digital copies before returning the albums to storage. Watching her work, I felt something unexpected. For months, I had worried about disappearing from the family story. Now, without arguments or confrontations, pieces of that story were quietly finding their way back into the light. Before leaving, Emily hugged me and thanked me for sharing everything. After she drove away, I remained at the dining room table surrounded by open albums and scattered photographs. Outside, Christmas lights glowed across the neighborhood. Inside, I looked at the faces frozen in those pictures and realized something important. Stories can be ignored. They can be forgotten. They can even be rewritten for a while. But the truth has a remarkable way of surviving. And for the first time since that birthday video, I had the feeling that the story was beginning to return to the people who deserved to know it. Christmas arrived with fresh snow covering the neighborhood and soft lights glowing from nearly every house on the street. That evening, Brandon and Melissa hosted the annual family gathering. For the first time in years, I attended without expectations. I did not need recognition. I did not need apologies. I simply wanted to enjoy the holiday. The house was filled with relatives, laughter, and the familiar smells of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine. Emily greeted me at the door with unusual excitement. Throughout the evening, she seemed to be carrying a secret. After dinner, she finally stood and asked everyone for a few minutes of attention. The room gradually quieted. Emily connected her laptop to the television and smiled nervously. I found something important while organizing old family photos, she explained. The screen flickered to life. What followed was not the polished birthday slideshow Melissa had created months earlier. This presentation was different. Photograph after photograph appeared, stretching back decades. There was Thomas building a treehouse with Brandon. There was our first backyard 4th of July celebration. There was Emily learning to ride a bicycle while I ran beside her. There were holiday dinners, school projects, birthday cakes, family road trips, and countless ordinary moments that formed the foundation of our lives. For nearly 20 minutes, the room watched memories unfold. This time, I was everywhere. Not because Emily was trying to make me the center of attention, because that was where I had always been. Several relatives began sharing stories connected to the photographs. One remembered a Christmas I hosted during a snowstorm. Another remembered a family reunion I organized years earlier. Gradually, something remarkable happened. People started remembering out loud. Not just events, contributions, traditions, origins, the true history of how many family customs began. I glanced toward Brandon. He was staring at the screen with an expression I had not seen in a very long time. Reflection, regret, understanding. Beside him, Melissa remained unusually quiet. Nobody accused her of anything. Nobody argued. Nobody created a scene. The photographs spoke for themselves. When the presentation ended, silence filled the room for several seconds before applause began. Emily looked relieved. Then she walked over and hugged me. I wanted everyone to see the whole story, she said softly. Those words stayed with me. The whole story. Later that evening, while guests mingled around the living room, Brandon approached me. His voice was quieter than usual. He admitted that he had not noticed how much had been forgotten until Emily put everything together. He apologized for being distracted, for making assumptions, and for allowing distance to grow without realizing it. I thanked him, not because the apology fixed everything, because it was honest. As the evening continued, I found myself standing near the Christmas tree, watching relatives laugh and exchange gifts. For the first time in a very long while, I felt completely at peace. The strange thing was that my life had already started changing long before that night. The painting classes, new friendships, quiet afternoons at the lake. Those experiences had already given me back something important, my sense of self. The photographs simply reminded everyone else of what I had finally remembered. My worth had never depended on whether I appeared in a slideshow, a social media post, or someone else's version of family history. When I returned home later that night, I stood for a moment beside the living room window. Snowflakes drifted gently beneath the streetlights. The house was quiet, warm, familiar. I thought about Thomas and the life we built together. I thought about Emily and her courage to ask difficult questions. Most of all, I thought about how easy it is to lose yourself while waiting for others to see you. The truth is, I did not get my life back because my family finally noticed me. I got my life back the day I stopped asking for permission to matter.